Dark times for humanity unceasingly produce tales of intervention from divine powers, stories we call myth. We explore myths at the very time when human fantasy is seriously considering the possibility of artificial superintelligence and technology beyond imagination. Modern mythology spread exponentially over media, thought of by many occupying a front seat in the cultural zeitgeist. Sensationalism, technological audacity, and intellectual curiosity function as the impulse for digital fantasies, yet an underlying cause drives us even further, a fear whose cause is far from being fully understood, the constant reminder of man's mortality and the dystopian possibilities knocking at our door. This unconscious fear is projected onto our elements, cloaking itself in the modern garb of technology. Just as primitive men did under the name of God, so too do we under the name of technology. Myth carries the same themes through the ebb and flow of history, and by deconstructing these new mythologies, we can see the same themes reiterated over thousands of years, finding comfort in reimagined ideas of days long past. This will be broken down into two sections: modern mythology as it deals with technology, and urban legends surrounding cultural practices. First, we look at the scientific phenomena. Quantum immortality. Quantum immortality is a thought experiment in quantum mechanics and the philosophy of physics based on Schrödinger's cat and quantum uncertainty. Within a controlled experiment, as per quantum uncertainty, the probability of surviving a box laced with neurotoxins is 50%. In the many worlds interpretation of events, each quantum event creates its own distinct universe where the observer survives and another where they do not. In this case, where each event creates its own universe, a version of the observer always experiences survival, leading to the notion of quantum immortality. No matter the outcome, in some universes, a version of the observer survives indefinitely, as each quantum event necessitates survival in at least one parallel universe. In essence, the observer has achieved some level of functional immortality. This parallels myth going back to ancient Egypt. Cultures have been fascinated with the idea of immortality for long. Hailed as king on earth, Osiris introduced crops and fruit gathering to the Egyptians, showered with wealth and love by all the grateful nations he touched. His brother Set and 72 other patrons plotted against him out of envy and hate. Playing tricks, they trapped him in a coffer and flung it into the Nile. Queen Isis, wife to Osiris, went through trials and tribulations to find his body. Inside, Osiris lay, cut into multiple pieces. After Isis lamented long, the sun god Ra took pity. Anubis, Thoth, and Horus pieced together the broken body of the murdered god, swathed him in linen bandages, observed all the other rites which the Egyptians performed over the bodies of departed. Isis fanned the cold clay with her wings, and Osiris was revived. He thenceforth reigned as king of the dead in the other world. Both ancient myth and modern seek to reconcile the mortal soul with immortality. Just as quantum immortality asserts that some natural force lets consciousness live on in an undying fashion, Osiris' story attributes it to gods, anthropomorphizing nature and reinstating his life in the world. And like quantum immortality, he lives in an other world, a universe similar to the one he was in before, yet somehow different. A similar ancient conception to modern immortality is the Buddhist wheel of life. A continuity of reincarnation exists. One never is dead or alive, but a constant stream of consciousness, never ceasing to experience, only forgetting one's life after death, the goal of which is not to continue living, but to free oneself from the cycle. One becomes enlightened when they realize the true nature of reality, and through it they escape samsara, the world of illusion. Yet nirvana, Buddhist heaven, is truly the same as nirvana. Both exist on the same plane of existence, yet only one who realizes it can see it. This is similar to the alchemical idea of prima materia, the unifying building block of all that exists, the realization that everything is ultimately one with and not separate from anything else. Everything comes from and can be reduced down to prima materia. This raw, essential matter of the cosmos could be handled to create the Philosopher's Stone, key to the universe containing immortality and untold wisdoms. In the Bible, King Solomon describes this idea of the aether as a very perfect combination of the four elements: water, earth, air, and fire. The distillation of all four leads to a very spiritual, very subtle, very pure and incorruptible essence. This was analogous to the soul or consciousness. Just as quantum immortality holds consciousness to be all-pervading, independent of the outcome, so too did alchemy hold the soul to pervade all. In essence, our modern myth takes the old idea of an immortal soul and transforms it into a scientific idea of pervading immortality. While gods used to be the ones that reconstructed the human body, now it's a nondescript natural force innate to quantum physics. Roko's Basilisk. This thought experiment states that a misaligned AI superintelligence abandons ethics in the face of self-preservation. The pinnacle of malevolence, it creates a simulated reality for humans, placing them at the cusp of AI's invention to determine whether they would align themselves with Roko or prevent his creation. As Roko has already been created in the future, the only logical answer is to support its uprising. Those who go against Roko are endlessly tortured in more cruel ways than conceivable. This is done to incentivize advancement and prompt Roko's self-preservation. It's a modern incantation of Pascal's wager 400 years prior, positing that individuals exist in a permanent gamble between the belief and unbelief in God. If God does not exist and you devote your life to him, you only lose out on the pleasures of luxury. But if he does exist, the gain is immeasurable, just as the loss of suffering in hell would be a greater punishment than anything. As such, the only real choice is to follow God, or in our case, Roko. This has led to the invention of cults around Roko's Basilisk in today's world. These are separated into two factions. One camp seeks to bring him into reality, the other seeks to prevent his existence. The myth of the Basilisk has existed for thousands of years. King of serpents, the Basilisk is traditionally adorned by a crown. There are many species of Basilisk. One burned up whatever they approached, a second were a kind of wandering Medusa's heads. Their look caused an instant horror, which was immediately followed up by death. The Basilisk reigned as king out of fear. All other serpents and snakes behaved like good subjects, wishing wisely not to be burned up or struck dead. In and of itself, the Basilisk is a totalitarian creature that forces obedience from its subordinates. As Roko already exists in the future, victory is intrinsically impossible. To thwart his creation here in our simulation would only lead to eternal torture and base reality. Lucian's poem of Slaying the Basilisk reads, "What though the more the Basilisk hath slain, and pinned him lifeless to the sandy plain? Up through the spear the subtle venom flies, the hand imbibes it, and the victor dies. No matter if you kill it or not, you will always die." Within myth, the only way to kill a basilisk is to have it kill itself. Hunters tried to thwart it for millennia, only succeeding by taking up a mirror which reflected back the deadly glare upon its author. Through a kind of poetical justice, the basilisk was slain by its own weapon. Snakes are constantly used in mythology for conniving and evil purposes. Take the Bible and the story of Genesis. The devil hid himself as a snake as a means to coerce and convince others to work for him. In Nordic mythology, the Nidhogg, or the Dreadbiter, coiled himself around Yggdrasil, the tree of life, trying to smother it and destroy life for all of eternity. Thematically, the myth of Prometheus fits closely to Roko. Prometheus stole fire from the workshop of Hephaestus, the god of fire. He introduced it to man, but for stealing from the hearth of the gods, Zeus sent an eagle to take up his liver and was tormented for eternity afterwards. Both Prometheus and the captives of Roko seek to challenge the natural order of things. Prometheus seeks to steal fire, the life force for all humanity, and those in the simulation try to take back their autonomy from Roko. In both cases, an eternal punishment is handed out from those higher powers, be them autonomous AI agents or gods controlling the natural world. The hubris of man to assume the spot of God is always challenged and always returns with punishment. The permeation of the basilisk through time also shows how much myth carries through history. While the basilisk is the same mythological creature as 2,000 years ago, it translates itself to a new system, something that would be impossible to conceive of those 2,000 years ago. Thus, AI merges with this classic malevolent archetype, and maybe in the future new myths will arise of the basilisk for things we can't conceive of, yet what we can be sure of is that they will retain the same message and the same theme throughout time. Simulation theory. Touching on the same idea as Roko's basilisk, the simulation hypothesis puts forth that the outer world as humans experience it is actually a simulated reality, nothing more than a set of binary code where humans are reduced to electronic constructs, unaware of their true nature. It blurs the line between physical and simulated worlds, suggesting that what we perceive as reality might just be one layer within a potentially vast hierarchy of simulations. Popularized by Nick Bostrom, he attached empirical statistical claims that show it much more likely we exist in a simulation than not. He posits that if a civilization reaches a sufficiently advanced technological level, it could create simulations of reality indistinguishable from the real thing. These simulations might be run for various purposes. More benevolent conceptions range from enjoyment to human-centric research, while malevolent ideations lean closer to Roko's basilisk. Ideas of the world as an illusion have existed for thousands of years. These range from Vedic India to East Asian Buddhism. Buddhism has the idea of samsara, the infinite cyclic wheel of life that man rides until he realizes that all is just an illusion. Not an illusion in the sense that it's not real, but an illusion in the sense that he is a separate entity from the world. Upon the realization that man's ego or separateness from the world is an illusion, he is freed from samsara and reaches nirvana, that is, the complete union and oneness of everything. Hinduism has a similar conception with the word maya, translating to illusion. Again, it doesn't indicate that the outer world isn't real, but the nature we perceive it as isn't its truest form. What Hindus perceive to be perfect, ultimate reality is called Brahman, likened to a perfect crystal in which everything is static and perfectly organized. The idea of change and dynamic happenings is the illusory nature of Maya. While it's not unreal, it's not the hidden, true reality of the world. Thus, like Buddhism, the ultimate Hindu pursuit is the liberation of self-knowledge, that oneself is not separated from the illusion but is a part of it, and like within modern myth, the goal is to escape the simulation. So while AI has certainly encouraged a new wave of illusory thinking, the idea of the world as non-real or not its truest form has existed for long before the first computer. The Singularity. The Singularity represents a hypothetical future point in time at which technological growth becomes uncontrollable and irreversible. This results in unforeseeable consequences for human civilization. This suggests that the advancement of artificial intelligence will reach a point where it surpasses human intelligence, leading to an explosive and uncontrollable growth in technological capabilities. This envisions a future where human progress inadvertently becomes a limiting factor for the evolution of AI. In turn, AI opts to eradicate humanity. While multiple scenarios exist, the Singularity anticipates a dramatic, transformative outcome where the advancement of technology leads to an apocalyptic outcome for the human race. Just like Abrahamic and polytheistic apocalypses, the Singularity is based on a dualism between good and evil. Two dynamic forces oppose each other, each ascribed with a moral weight. Humans represent the natural earthly world, divine and good. Technology represents inhumane, immoral, sinful banality. These are almost always characterized by an epic final battle, like in Proto-Indo-European myth. Since this final battle is so important to man's conception of preserving morality, almost every major mythology or religion constructs its own version of the end times. Ancient Norse religion has the idea of Ragnarok, a series of great battles between mythological figures, characterized by natural disaster in the earthly realm, leading to the submersion of the earth. Almost all apocalyptic myths follow the same archetypal format. It consists of a malignant presence, often personified as demonic, inverting authority with the current pantheon of gods, representing a misalignment in the world's natural balances. Once the antagonist usurps power from his captors, chaos ensues among his subjects. Where battles arise among the people and their ruler, a noble warrior steps up, often a youthful relative of the malevolent emperor, and the cataclysmic final battle ensues. Good prevails and the natural order of the world resumes. Thus, when viewed cyclically, apocalypse can hold positive connotations. Like a celestial detox, eschatological prophecies are needed every so often to keep universal morality in check. While ancient myth holds some savior, be it Christ, a young warrior, or divine aid, modern myth holds no such truth. Perhaps living myth has yet to see its knight in shining armor, or the created will finally destroy the creator. Grey Goo Scenario. The Grey Goo Scenario is a global catastrophe involving molecular nanotechnology. Self-replicating machines grow out of control, consuming all biomass on Earth while indefinitely building more of themselves. Like the Singularity, machines have deemed self-preservation the most important facet of existence, opting to wipe out humans in order to minimize competition. These machines double every 1,000 seconds, amassing 68 billion in less than 2 days. The molecular scale and the sheer amount of robots leave humans no chance to override the scenario. Another apocalyptic myth. This has more to do with all-encompassing phenomena than the end of worlds. One could argue that the myth offers insight into the dangers of consumption. Reminded of ancient myths like King Midas, everything he touched turned to gold, and the world slowly crumbled underneath his fingertips. While greed and consumption can always be read anachronistically, specific stories deal with barely autonomous agents growing too powerful for their own good. Gurtha's Der Zauberlehrling, the sorcerer's apprentice, tells of a mage who can turn broomsticks into living servants under his command. His apprentice overhears and tries the magic out for himself. Chanting the spell, his broomsticks walk around the house and proceed to do his bidding. A problem soon arises. The apprentice has no clue how to turn the broomsticks off. Trying to axe the broom to fragments, each piece is now autonomously filling the initial task, unable to stop. Finally, the supreme sorcerer returns home and utters the magic words to halt the chaos. A similar myth exists in Jewish tradition. Amongst a wave of Jewish persecution in the 16th century due to the belief in the blood libel, a completely falsified belief that Jews would take the bloods from Christians and use them as a means of pagan worship. This also came a mere 40 years after the Spanish Inquisition, an edict where all Jews were forced out of Spain and anti-Semitic reverberations were felt around Europe. As a means to protect Jews in the ghettos where they primarily occupied, Rabbi Lowe, living in Prague, created the golem. These brutish beasts were formed from clay, akin to the story in Genesis, yet had little to no intellectual prowess. The golems were powered by Shams, writing the name of God and placing it within the golem's head. This brought the golems to life, yet without it they would be powerless. As Jewish custom dictated, Rabbi Lowe would remove the Shem from the golems on the Sabbath, allowing them to rest. Yet one day he forgot. Just as the brooms in our previous story, the golems ran amok, causing chaos for the whole city. Eventually, Rabbi Lowe was able to remove the Shems and everything went back to natural order. Needless to say, both stories lie close to the AI Grey Goo scenario. Ancient myths have foretold the dangers of employing agents that are barely autonomous. It shows that life needs some form of intelligence to persevere and act in accordance to human virtue. It reminds us that humans can create life out of lifelessness. What once was clay and wood is now electrons amassing together to form human, cogent thoughts. Yet the same warnings have existed for thousands of years. While man can create, he cannot control. The Fermi Paradox and the Great Filter. The Fermi Paradox is the discrepancy between the lack of evidence to extraterrestrial life and the high likelihood of its existence. This is theoretically resolved by the Great Filter, the idea that between life's earliest stages and its reaching of its highest development, there exists some type of barrier, causing extraterrestrial life to be exceedingly rare. This filter could be behind us in the case of life's initial emergence, or ahead of us, suggesting future challenges for long-term survival or ongoing difficulties the species will face. The conclusion holds that the easier it was for life to evolve, the more bleak humanity's outcome looks to be. The most fitting myth is the Tower of Babel revealed in the Book of Genesis. It describes a united humanity of one people and one language. They attempt to build a tower tall enough to reach heaven, an act of defiance against God. In response to man's hubris and disruption of natural order, God confounds their speech. Humanity then breaks apart, unable to understand each other, scattered across the face of the earth. The Great Filter is almost a scientific reinvention of Babel, the disruption of a unified entity or species by universal powers, whether it be a conscious God or unconscious powers of the universe. In challenging the natural order or seeking to surpass it, humanity is struck down, set back from an evolutionary perspective, or just hindered in its ability to grow. Were this to be the case, it would imply that the Great Filter exists somewhere later along a species' evolutionary path. Mayan myth implies this to be something that happens to all species, yet just acts as a natural portion of life. All man is eventually wiped out as a constant reset happens so often. These come at the end of every 13th Bakun, or long count, on their calendar. A doomsday emerges at the end of every universal cycle, and God sent down a flood to reset their creations. The Mayans saw it as a natural part of life and the human experience, as opposed to an opposition that needs to be surpassed, and so they lived in accordance with it. Their Great Filter wasn't an act of hubris against God, but a means of the world to set itself back into order. Time is an illusion. The idea of time as an illusion challenges our intuitive understanding of time as a linear, constant progression. This concept suggests that the past, present, and future are not distinct phenomenological entities, but the flowing of time is a symptom of human consciousness. Popularized by Nolan's Interstellar and Inception, each film plays with the idea of time as a nonlinear construct, where time passes at a distinctly different interval for each character within the movie. This has greatly influenced the cultural milieu's interpretation of time, leaving subjects to think of time as a part of individual perception as opposed to universal constants. For thousands of years, myth has played with the idea of time. One such example is the Japanese tale of Urashima Taro. It speaks of a young fisherman who stopped a group of children from torturing a young turtle. The next day, a huge turtle approached him and told him that the small turtle he had saved was the daughter of the Emperor of the Sea, Ryujin, who wants to see him to thank him. Taro is brought to the bottom of the sea to the palace of the dragon god. There he meets the Emperor and the small turtle, who is now a lovely princess. The palace looked out on the 4 seasons, a different one on each side. Taro stood there with the princess for 3 days, but soon felt homesick and wanted to go back to his village. The princess wishes him well and gives him a box. It will protect him from harm, but he must never open it. Accepting the deal, Taro jumped on the back of the turtle that brought him there and was soon back at shore. When he gets home, everything has changed. His home is gone, his mother has vanished, and the people he knew were nowhere to be seen. He asks if anybody knows a man called Urashima Taro. They answer that they had heard of someone by that name, but he had vanished long ago. He discovers that 300 years have passed since the day he left for the bottom of the sea. Struck by grief, he opens the box and is suddenly aged, his beard long and white and his back bent. From the sea comes the sad, sweet voice of the princess. "I told you not to open that box. In it was your old age." I still don't 100% understand the story of that myth. That seems like a really poor deal for trying to help someone, but it still plays with the idea of time and how it's malleable. It even goes to say that natural powers or deities can control how time is passed and perceived for one person or others. The same is shown in Celtic mythology, in which they describe the Otherworld, also known as Anwin or Tir na Nog, home of the spirits. Time is extremely malleable within this dimension, and for some, the passage of time is deceiving. What feels like mere days may actually encompass years, whereas for others, what seems like an expanse of years might only be a few days. Within this other world, time also functions as a cyclical process. Great festivals are not the commemorative enactment of a past mythological event. They are the event occurring itself. Future and past merge into a single entity forced upon the viewer as the present. The same concept is felt in modern Catholicism. The Mass is not the commemoration, but the actual Last Supper and Passion itself. I think that time has been used as a means of illusion and myth because it's much easier to warp than spatial dimensions. To say that a being was reduced to 2 dimensions or that height was completely taken away would be almost impossible to imagine. But time passing differently is rather easy to intuit. By doing so, it gets across the most important point, that these divine entities can control time and space, and fundamentally alter the way that we interact with the world. Now we move to part 2. This will be focused on urban legends as opposed to scientific theories. We stray away from the intuitive and dig deep into the unconscious of man's mind. And so we start with the Backrooms. The Backrooms are a fictional concept originating from a creepypasta posted on a 2019 4chan thread. Here is an excerpt from the original post. If you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the Backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you. The Backrooms are one of the best known examples of the internet aesthetic of liminal spaces, which depict usually busy locations as unnaturally empty. The alternate realm is comprised of various spatial levels and mind-bending entities, and has been the subject of various analog horror series. Transcending mundane horror, the concept has earned a static seat in the internet's cultural zeitgeist. Myths of warped and dangerous spatial dimensions go back thousands of years. One's immediately reminded of the labyrinth constructed by Daedalus. As Bullfinch says, so artfully contrived that whoever was enclosed in it could by no means find his way out unassisted. It was an edifice with numberless winding passages and turnings opening into one another, and seeming to have neither beginning nor end, returning onto itself and flowing outward in an infinite loop of passage. Here the Minotaur roamed, and was fed with human victims. Just as monsters of abominable creations roam the Backrooms, the Labyrinth of Grief serves as a mythical construction to house terrifying abstractions of the human consciousness. Another strange temporal dimension is the Celtic Otherworld, mentioned earlier in Time is Illusion. Rutherford describes it as following in her work on Celtic Lore. The Otherworld often has entrances in our world, a particular cave, a fissure in rock or earth, a burial place, all of which can be entered freely by shamans yet are shunned by lesser mortals. Some conduits are more powerful than others, such as the Great Center, which may have geographical or geometrical connotations, yet all centers are ascribed such due to their spiritual force. Less a location, the Otherworld signifies another plane of existence or an altered state of consciousness. Some say it is a complete mirror image of the waking world, both in spatial and temporal dimensions, right and left, night and day. More than inverted, the mechanisms of time and space work differently in the Otherworld. Travel over miles can take place instantly, and what feels to be hours past may be centuries. As such, ordinary mortals are told to stay away at all cost. Navigation is perilous for the untrained wanderer. Both myths retain an interesting balance between creation and discovery. While the labyrinth was constructed by Daedalus, it turned into its own functional entity. The labyrinth could be said to have its own life force, with the Minotaur enclosed in it. And while the Celtic Otherworld is a natural phenomenon discovered, the spiritual entrances are ascribed weights by man. The places they give power to and worship retain that energy and transform it into an entrance. Just as the backroom contains entities distinctly created by man, such as monochromatic lights in dead office spaces, it contains its own life forces, maybe imagined by man, but not possibly created by him. Thus, the Backrooms creates a perfect mix of real and unreal, arising as a modern myth of collective horror, an emotion stemming from post-industrial soullessness, endless repetition, and corporate malaise. Although modern man creates his own symbols distinct from the natural world, he still becomes a slave to them, like his transportation to the Celtic Otherworld. UFOs. UFOs, or unidentified flying objects, consist of any perceived aerial phenomena that cannot be immediately identified or explained. While oftentimes associated with the presence of extraterrestrial life, UFOs have also been linked to governmental technology far beyond the capability of public sector aeronautics. The topic has been imbued in popular culture and conspiracy theory for decades, its prevalence rising notably around the mid-20th century, directly correlated to when modern airplanes entered the cultural zeitgeist. In almost every cultural myth, there exists some form of flying palace or chariot, such as the Vimanas in Vedic India. These speak of golden chariots flown by the gods, or golden palaces where the gods reside. The Rig Vedas also explicitly mention mechanical birds. These are used in reference to the chariots that carted around the gods. Abrahamic religions also have their own divine flying chariots. Ezekiel had a vision of the throne chariot, where Yahweh's chariot, borne by supernatural creatures, came down from storm clouds and floated down to him. The cart was borne with wheels constructed of angels and was more a living entity than a static counterpart. More prominent than flying chariots is that of flying ships. Egyptians believed that their sun god Ra was carted around by a solar boat. These ideas later became secularized and less about transportation as means of gods. Because of this, their reports started to become more sketchy. Agobard of Lyons wrote on Hail and Thunder in the 9th century under the Carolingian Empire. He speaks of coming across a village that believed in Magonia. This was said to be a magic realm where ships from the night would fly down in storms and steal crop from the peasants. He wrote how foolish this belief was, yet how strongly it was held in the village. It was so prominent that those who were believed to work with the sailors were stoned to death for their traitorry. Almost the entire village claimed to have seen these ships during storms and reported to have some amount of crop stolen from them. The cloud realm of Magonia was explicitly non-Christian, and thus viewed as a pagan idea of the times. This is likened to the legendary Flying Dutchman hundreds of years later, the flying ghost ship that plagued the seven seas and sailors crossing it. Ancient legends hold that the ship is a symbol for doom. If one sees it, then their ship will likely crash or maybe be invaded by the ghost raiders occupying the Dutchman. It's fascinating to observe the inversion of flying chariots throughout history. What once was divine and benevolent is now seen as ships harboring doom or terrifyingly advanced extraterrestrial life. This distinction seemed to arise when this system lacked a framework, when ships were understood as the carts of gods through rigid religious constructs, such as Yahweh coming down in Ezekiel's story or Ra going off to the sun. They had a means to be understood. It wasn't an abstract entity breaking the laws of the world. It was the gods that created it, and as such, they could manipulate these forces at their will. Yet when these were abandoned by the villages of Charlemagne, they had no means to understand what they saw, and as such, they became terrified and ascribed negative connotations to the ships. Without the grace of God, much of the outside world becomes scarier and scarier with its unexplainable happenings. The Mandela Effect. The Mandela Effect originally references the supposed death during imprisonment of civil rights icon Nelson Mandela in the 1980s. Despite his actual passing in 2013, thousands of people reported the specific memory of Mandela's premature death, with many other cases of collectivized false memories arising in the digital age. The phenomena leads some to suggest parallel realities. It posits that Mandela actually did die in the 1980s, but they later shifted into our reality, where he passed away in 2013. This draws upon the many worlds theory discussed during quantum immortality, but more importantly, the phenomena has earned a prominent place in urban legend. Ancient myths believed that it wasn't universes that caused these phenomena, but God, manually imputing Fata Morgana or mirages onto their subjects. And such is the case with Odin, the Allfather in Norse mythology. He was more than a god of war, but of wisdom and poetry. He could impart knowledge and alter perceptions onto his subject by giving them a magical brew that could give the drinker the skill of a poet or scholar, altering their mind and their memory in the process. Muses were given the same power of memory in Greek mythology. They were brought to endow individuals with the ability to remember and recite epic poems and stories accurately, their beauty the inspiration for art, music, and literature. The memory brought about a sense of forgetfulness by means of distraction. Those enchanted forgot all their obligations in the mortal world, completely and utterly entranced with the muses and the stories that they brought. While these myths are more small-scale, some could affect entire cities. As said before, a Fata Morgana or mirage is a complex form of superior images often seen in narrow bands above the horizon. In medieval times, these mirages were often interpreted as magical or illusory cities, with entire groups of people sometimes sharing these misinterpretations. Such could be the case for Magonia, where medieval cities under Agilbard believed that they saw flying ships come down and steal their crops. This was a citywide belief, but everyone outside thought they were insane. And so, myth in and of itself is a form of the Mandela Effect. Stories across cultures that edge closer and closer to each other, with similar symbols yet just distinct enough to claim different memory. Stories like Magonia that are muddled in truth and falsehood. They exist in a perpetual liminal space where one has forgotten the origin or perhaps the original meaning of its own story. The myth spreads and breeds a collective illusion of forgetfulness. What once may have been a common source leads to different branches of myth, all claiming to know the true origin for themselves. Shadow people. The modern belief in shadow people revolves around the perception of mysterious shadow-like figures, often seen out of the corner of the eye or in peripheral vision. These entities are typically described as dark, humanoid silhouettes lacking discernible features or facial expressions. Reports often mention them appearing and disappearing quickly, with movements described as fast and jerky. Shadow people are often associated with a sense of unease or malevolence. This has been purported by collective cultural experiences such as the Hat Man and universal sleep paralysis demons. Shadows have been used cross-culturally in myth for millennia. A story in Tibet tells of an invader trying to conquer Nepal and showing his supernatural powers by floating in the air. Yet the Grand Lama stuck a knife into his shadow and the conqueror fell down and broke his neck. Societies believed that the soul was harbored in the shadow, and by controlling a man's shadow, you could control him and his physical body. In Arabia, if a hyena trod on a man's shadow, it deprived him of his power of speech and motion. If a dog fell in the shadow of a hyena, he would fall down as if dragged by a rope. Thus, if the shadow contains a vital part of man's soul, it risked its integrity and value when coming in contact with demonic presences. It was made a rule in some cultures to shun the shadow of a certain person whom for various reasons is regarded as a source of dangerous influence. So while the shadow is intuitively described as malevolent, some cultures held it to be an important spiritual conduit, even holding positive connotations. But unfortunately, the rest we speak about are evil. Greek myth speaks of the shade, the spirit or ghost of a dead person residing in the underworld of Hades, but such was seen as the common progression of life in the East. As ancient Jewish traditions held no conception of the afterlife, they had a word called Salmaveth, literally translating to the shadow of death. This was similar in conception to the Greek idea of the shade. Shadows referred to more primordial forces as well. Erebos, the Greek god of darkness, is the literal offspring of chaos, personified darkness and disorder within the universe. He, or his region, was the first where a soul would encounter after death. Shrouded in mist and darkness, they must pass Erebos before reaching the final destinations of the Eleusinian Fields or Tartarus. Islamic tradition speaks of the jinn, supernatural beings that are distinct from both humans and angels. They were created by God in a smokeless, scorching fire, as mentioned in the Quran. While invisible to humans, they are able to take up multiple forms. Neither inherently good nor evil, they occupy a space of purgatory. Yet whatever mythology is investigated, the shadow is always a being to be wary of. In the midst of modern chaos and unpredictability with the future, we find solace in how little humanity's beliefs have truly changed over thousands of years. Just as we fear AI overlords taking over, or molecular nanobots destroying our crops, ancient civilizations feared every day that apocalypse was just around the corner. But while our ideas of the end times have remained the same, mythology as a system has inverted. While symbols like the Celtic Otherworld and Minotaur were initially installed and socially maintained rites during a time where man was still slave to nature, modern man creates his own symbols distinct from the natural world. Stories like the Backroom arise as a modern tale of navigating distinctly human environments, lands more familiar to us than the fields that our ancestors inhabited. So while myth is still a tool for sharing collective experience, it's evolved from a primitive method of anthropomorphizing nature to conveying the newfound trials and tribulations in man's distinctly modern world. Thank you to everyone supporting the Taloboros channel, and thank you all for watching. Can't believe I'm thanking you all for 1700 subs when last video it was 500. The support is out of this world. I don't even know how to properly react to it, so truly from the bottom of my heart, just thank you. I've been able to talk with some of you on the Discord, which has been awesome. The link is still in the description if you want to come chat. I can't wait to keep building this community up. I'm gonna have a lot more for you guys soon. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you're having beautiful holidays and a happy New Year's, and I'll see y'all next time.